Hello. In a book of days for April, the entry for April the 23rd is about James Buchanan. But as we've just celebrated Independence Day this weekend, it's possibly more relevant for the first weekend in July. But a few words about James Buchanan first. James Buchanan was the 15th president of an expanding United States, and he was born on April the 23rd, 1791. He is the only president to date who remained a lifelong bachelor, which might suggest that the women of his time had exercised one of the few rights that was available to them. But Buchanan only got the Democratic nomination because he was from Pennsylvania, and it was necessary for the Democrats to win there and defeat a very strong challenge from the Republicans. Although Buchanan was not without political experience. He'd been a senator, Secretary of State, and the Minister to Great Britain, a very, very important post at the time. When the election came, he defeated the Republican John C. Fremont in the 1856 election, but that win proved to be the high point of his presidency. In his victory speech, he promised to restore harmony to the Union, and this was a promise he did not keep. Although at the time restoring harmony was of paramount importance because the question of slavery was dividing the nation. But in his support for popular sovereignty, he believed that the question as to whether a newly admitted state, the question was concretely about Kansas at the time, but the United States was in a period of very rapid expansion. He believed that the question as to whether a newly admitted state should allow slavery or not should depend on the inhabitants of the territory and not on Congress. In his inaugural address, he stated that the issue of slavery had little practical importance. This might have been wishful thinking, but whatever, it was definitely wrong. And after his term, which he spent doing nothing of any importance whatsoever, he did not stand for re-election in 1860. And the contest in that year was won by Abraham Lincoln. But in the 3 months that passed between the election and Lincoln taking up office in March 1861, 7 states left the Union. The Civil War was on, and Buchanan, through his inactivity and complete ineptitude, bears much of the blame, I think. Many people believe Buchanan was the worst president that the United States ever had. Now, in October 2017, the Atlantic magazine published an article by Professor Jack Goldsmith of Harvard Law School titled, "Will Donald Trump Destroy the Presidency?" And here is an extract. Open quotation, "Donald Trump is testing the institution of the presidency unlike any of his 43 predecessors. We have never had a president so ill-informed about the nature of his office, so openly mendacious or so self-destructive, or so brazen in his abusive attacks on the courts, the press, Congress, including members of his own party, and even senior officials within his own administration. Trump is a Frankenstein's monster of past presidents' worst attributes. Andrew Jackson's rage, Millard Fillmore's bigotry, James Buchanan's incompetence and spite, Theodore Roosevelt's self-aggrandizement, Richard Nixon's paranoia, insecurity and indifference to law, and Bill Clinton's lack of self-control and reflexive dishonesty. I think we can see from that extract that Professor Goldsmith is not a big fan of President Trump. But I would argue, in fact, that it's the very nature of the institution itself which delivers presidents that are so divisive. The Constitution of the United States was signed on September the 17th, 1787, and sought to establish a powerful, independent executive branch. Article 2 of the Constitution gives the President executive power, but is not very clear about what this should involve. The nature of the presidency has changed as the country has changed. The founding fathers were writing of a fairly limited territory, very British in origin and institutions, and of course the country has changed and the United States has become the most powerful country in the world, and with it the office of the President of the United States has become arguably the most powerful position in the world. There are checks and balances which limit the power of the President, but the office is defined by the person who occupies it. Curiously, before the founders decided on the final form of the new government, another idea was tried. On May the 22nd, 1782, Colonel Louis Nicolas sent a letter to George Washington on behalf of army officers. And in this letter, he proposed that Washington should become King of the United States. Nicolas was proposing a constitutional monarchy rather than a tyranny, but regardless, Washington was not impressed by the idea and would eventually, and very reluctantly, become the first president, a post he held from 1789 until 1797. But before he took on this post, another attempt was made to find a king. In 1786, the president of the Continental Congress, Nathaniel Gorham, wrote to Prince Henry, the younger brother of King Frederick the Great of Prussia, inviting him to be the King of the United States. Again, the idea was to establish a constitutional monarchy, but Henry, conscious of the fact that the Americans had fought long and hard to escape the domination of George III, did not think such a position would be very secure, so politely turned the offer down. Now, a monarch's role in a democracy has become representative. He or she represents the nation as a whole and is above the factional politics of parties. However, this is not the case in the United States with the office of president. The president represents a party, and as such, therefore, whatever he says or does to the contrary cannot help but be divisive. Perhaps it's time to rethink the office itself. Since the days of Washington, the requirements for being president have not changed. A candidate must be a natural-born citizen of the country, which we can interpret to mean that he or she must have been born in the United States, but the citizenship of the candidate's parents is not important. The candidate must have been resident for 14 years and be older than 35. Therefore, race, gender or class is no barrier to the presidency, but the ability to find a lot of money has become so. The two final candidates in 2016, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, spent a combined total of $2.4 billion on their campaigns, with Clinton spending around twice as much as Trump. Generally, the candidate who spends the most wins, but that election reversed the trend. And if you cannot find that sort of money, you can forget about being president. And surely this was not the intention of the founding fathers. I would suggest that the presidency evolve to become more like an elected constitutional monarchy. One way to do this would be for each state to choose two candidates who fulfill the requirements. How the state does this should be left to the state to decide. This list of, say, 100 should then be reviewed by a congressional committee, but some information would be hidden from them. They would not be given the candidate's name, gender, race, or political affiliation. The list of 100 would then be reduced to 10, and the public would choose one, now openly, to be president with limited executive power. There are probably so many holes in this idea that you could drive a bus comfortably through them, but interested to hear what you think. I'll see you next time when the topic will be Stalin in the Soviet Union. Thank you very much indeed.